This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted on March the 16th, 1972. The interview was conducted by Mr. James Katigan, that's capital Katigan. The interviewee is Mrs. Lawrence Cannon, that's capital Lawrence, capital Cannon, of Ponca City, Oklahoma. This material is being re-recorded on the 17th of January, 1989 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
Today, Thursday, March 16, 1972, we are interviewing for the Oklahoma Christian College and the Living Legends on tape Mrs. Lawrence Cannon of Ponca City, Oklahoma. Mrs. Cannon was a farmer, Denny Goodson of Blackwell, Oklahoma. Your interviewer today is James Katigan for the Oklahoma Living Legends. Mrs. Cannon, tell us something about your background and the history as you remember in this section of Ponca City, especially of the runs and the different historical events as you remember them.
Thank you. Well, it's my privilege and pleasure to do anything I can for the memory of the old pioneers. My mother and father both are pioneers of this section of Oklahoma. I had 4 uncles in the race besides my father, and I am so proud to say one thing in their behalf. I would like to say and tell you the story of the pioneers as told in the last run. It was written by the DAR chapter Ponca City in 1939, and this is our 3rd edition. I might say that we went out and interviewed these old pioneers. We had them tell their story in their own words. We did not correct one sentence. It is given as they gave it to us. And it is from that I would like to read a few of the chapters on the pioneers of that time.
Mrs. Cannon, tell us more about the book published by the Ponca City DAR.
Well, this book was written, it took us about 3 years to compile it, but we all worked as hard as we could on it, and a lot of it was written in my basement. We put up tables down there, and we then would assign each girl a pioneer. We'd say, you go out and interview Mr. Donahoe or Mr. Miller. And so when they would come back, they had the story just as the pioneer had told it, and we did not correct one word. We left it just like it is. And it took us several years, and it's from all over this Cherokee Strip, not only Ponca, but it was Blackwell, Tonkawa, and all around here. And so we're very, very proud of this book, and I happen to be the regent the year it was published, so that is my main heritage, if I have amounted to anything in this life, was this book. It's next to my Bible. And I'd like to read to you a little bit about the pioneer days by Dora Berry, which was my mother, and Ole Goodson. I shall not read it all, but I'll read the part pertaining mainly to this. In 1889, old Oklahoma proper was open to settlement. Father staked a claim in 1890 and took all the family to it. We went in a covered wagon across the entire strip, which was covered with tall grass. I was turned around and it was hard for me to get my directions. We spent the summer on the claim. In 1890, we moved to Wellington, Kansas, so we could have advantage of a better school. During all those years, we heard about the soldiers trying to drive the cowboys out of this land so they could open it for settlement. It was opened in 1893. Father lost the place, so when the strip was opened, he tried again and staked a claim 2 miles south and 3 miles east of Blackwell. We were living in Stillwater, Oklahoma before the strip opened. I attended A&M College when there were classes in the buildings in that town. It was the first year the school was opened. Later, people began to come to register for the opening of the strip. Soon the town was a mass of covered wagons, horses, mules, and people with the dust so deep you could hardly get around. They had to stand in line to register, and day after day they would stand and wait in line. I have stood for hours, resting them as my father and brother were both in line. When they had registered, they had to go around the strip to the north side as they made the race from Arkansas City, Kansas. On the 16th of September, when they made the run, there were 3 on a claim that Father staked. The contest lasted 3 years, and Father lost. My brother Tom didn't get anything. During the 3 years we lived there, I filed a contest on a claim 5 miles south of Blackwell, as there was no sign of anyone living on it. I built a small house on the claim, and the family moved back to Stillwater, Oklahoma in the summer of 1897. On the 16th of September, my uncle Robert Brown, Aunt Nora Berry, and I went to Stillwater, up to the line to witness the opening of the strip. And when the signal was given, we drove in quite a ways. On October the 6th, Mother, Jim, and I moved to the claim Father had staked. We took lumber in the wagon and built us a very small house. We put straw on the floor and our bedding over the straw. We cooked with a Dutch oven over a campfire. We had the bed of the covered wagon, and we lived that way 6 weeks before Father was able to build us a house. The boards of the house were straight up and down, and it was built 14 by 28 feet. Jim and I carried water from the river the 6 weeks we lived there. We had 1 cow, 1 pony, a little cart, and some chickens. The living conditions were not very good. My mother was indeed a pioneer woman, the bravest little soul that ever lived. No task was too great for her, but she left for her children to carry on the work she had begun, which they had been faithfully done. Ole Goodson and I were married October the 24th, 1897 in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and then we moved to my claim, which I had proved up, which took 5 years. The Indians lived on the place next to ours. They were nice people and good Indians. They were the Tonkawas. Ole Goodson left Missouri, came down on the north line to Arkansas City. He was in the race, but he got nothing. Later, he bought Dr. Manchester off. He put filings on the claim, lived on it and the required number of years, paid $500, and proved it up. Most of the houses in the early days cost about $50, more or less. Mr. Goodson and I know what it means to be pioneers of a new country. We attended the inauguration of the first governor of Oklahoma to be elected by the people at Guthrie. In this ceremony, they moeded the Indian Territory to Oklahoma, which later became a state. When the Constitution was written for Oklahoma, my uncle, the late George Berry of Pawnee, helped write it. Passed on Mr. Goodson passed on November the 26th, 1934, but we kept our place we got in the strip opening. I would like to quote what the Blackwell Tribune said about my husband upon his death. The death of Ole Goodson Blackwell and the Blackwell community have suffered a complete loss, such as can come only with the removal of a highly respected citizen, a pioneer citizen in this case. For 30 years, Mr. Goodson was actively engaged with the affairs of this community, which became his home with the opening of the Cherokee Strip in 1893. With unwavering faith in the future of the new country in which he cast his lot, he contributed largely to every step of the community's progress, socially, morally, and financially. While building his own success, he was an important factor in that of his hometown and community. Every effort for the uplifting of society found a champion in Ole Goodson. He was a friend to education, the church, to which he gave his moral and financial support, a loving husband and father, a loyal friend, a good citizen. In the highest sense of the term, that is what the community lost when Ole Goodson passed away. Those who came to Cake County as pioneers are passing on one by one. The death of Ole Goodson creates a large vacancy in their rank. We had two children, Jenny and Pauline. Jenny was born on the claim south of Blackwell. She is Ms. Lawrence Cannon of Ponca City. They have three children, Virginia Pauline Cronin, Lawrence Goodson Cannon, and Joe Barry Cannon. Pauline was born on the place east of Blackwell, now known as the Goodson Ranch. She married L.A. Cullison of Blackwell, and she passed away in 1936, leaving a 9-month-old boy, William Eugene. In a few years, these little grandchildren will be building on the foundation their forefathers laid in the opening of the strip.
Mrs. Cannon, I knew your Uncle James Berry at the State House in Oklahoma City. Will you give us something on his background?
Thank you. I'd be happy to. Uncle Jim Berry was Lieutenant Governor of Oklahoma for 20 years, so most all the Oklahoma people knew him one way or the other. He had a lovely wife, Aunt Edwina Berry, too. And this little article I'm going to read to you is what Uncle Jim wrote. He wrote this for our last run book, and it's his own wording, and we're very proud of it. He said, when I was a very small boy, I came with my parents to Payne County, where we lived in a little town of Stillwater. The southern edge of the Cherokee Strip was about 5 miles north of Stillwater, and for several weeks prior to September the 16th, 1893, Stillwater was full of prospective home seekers, and I distinctly recall seeing the men training their horses for that big race. It was a hot, dry summer, and so dusty that you could hardly see anything. The dust was caused by the unusually large number of people living here while awaiting the opening of the strip. My father, W.E. Berry, was familiar with the land which was to be opened for settlement, so he and my brother Tom and others went to a point in Kansas just north of Blackwell, Oklahoma, where they made the race on horseback and where they took up a claim on the Shikaska River bottom southeast of the town of Blackwell. It happened that my father and brother both settled on the same quarter, one getting on the northwest corner, the other one locating on the southeast corner of the same farm, so they could not hold but the one claim. Father built a small 2-room house soon after the opening, and we moved on the claim in the fall of 1893. I took it upon myself to keep the family well provided with fish and game, which was plentiful in that vicinity. so we did not have to spend much money for food. I attended a country school, which was 2 miles north of our home for a while, and later I went to school in Blackwell where my teacher was John Davis, who is now teaching at the East Central State College at Ada, Oklahoma, and our friendship has extended to the present time. The neighborhood was settled by aggressive young people. Most of them came from Kansas, and they were hard-working, industrial citizens. They made good in their efforts, and Kate County is now one of the best counties in this state. I am indeed proud that I was permitted to live among and to know these early settlers who have done so much to develop the state of Oklahoma. This letter was written July the 26th, 1939.
Mrs. Cannon, Mr. Berry had a brother. Now, would you tell us something about this brother?
This is from Uncle Tom Berry, a brother of Uncle Jim. And this is his short story that was in the last run as he told it. I was living with my parents near Stillwater when my father and I decided to go to Arkansas City, Kansas, and make the run into the Strip. It was a long, hot ride through the tall grass to reach Arkansas City, and we had to go clear around to the north side. We had two very good horses. My horse was called Ginger. I could have gone much faster, but Paul kept holding me back. I will never forget the excitement of that day. My heart was pounding in my young body, and I knew everyone else's was the same. Paul wanted us to stay together, so we did, and it happened we both staked the same quarter section. Ours, like so many, was contested. My father drove to Perry to file, but after a long, hard battle, we lost. It lasted 4 years. Paul and I went back to Stillwater, and I've made my home there ever since. I married Hattie Patton. We have 8 fine children: Dora, Ruby, Tom Jr., Nellie, Martha, Vanita, William, and Jack. And I might say that William Berry is now Supreme Court Justice of the state of Oklahoma. I consider this the greatest horse race of all times, and I am glad that I was in it, although I did not get a claim. Oh, where is the...
Mrs. Cannon, from this very fine publication, you have another uncle, Matt Goodson, from Missouri to Oklahoma. Let's talk a little bit about Matt.
Thank you. This story was told by his wife. Uncle Matt had died before this book was published, but she says Matt Goodson was just 17 years of age when the Cherokee Strip was opened to settlement. Although he lived in what had seemed to be far-off state of Missouri, he heard a great deal of the possibilities of Indian Territory from his uncle who had made the race, and he staked a claim 3 miles east and 1 mile south of the city that later developed into Blackwell. As soon as he became of age, he decided that he would seek his fortune in this promised land. In the month of July 1897, he started from his home in Carrollton, Missouri, in a covered wagon drawn by 2 good Missouri mules, which he received by another team that he led behind the wagon. After traveling 12 days, a tired, homesick young man with 2 sick mules arrived at his cousin's home on the 2nd day of August, 1898. The next day he started out to the home of his brother and sister-in-law, Mr. and Ms. Ole Goodson, who had already settled on claims near Blackwell, where he stayed till he bought a relinquishment on 160 acres of land which is located on the Shikaska River, 3 miles south and 3 miles east of Blackwell, for which he paid $2,000. There were two contests filed on the land, but Matt finally won out. His first home was a dugout on the banks of the river, where he said where he lived 2 winters. This may have been occupied by Indians, since this farm was said to have been the camping ground of Indians. Occasionally arrowheads and unfinished pieces of flint are plowed up even at the present time. His next home was a small house 14 by 16 feet, in which he built a double-deck bed using 2 by 4 posts. He farmed on the summer and cut wood in the winter, which he hauled to Blackwell and sold to help buy provisions. And at 1905, he bought the quarter section, which is directly north of his land, for which he paid $8,000. In 1909, he was married to Daisy Kistler, daughter of one of the other pioneer families, whom he met at the Prairie Home Sunday School. There was really the only social life young people had at that time. He drove a black horse hitched to a top buggy when he went to Blackwell to be married, and he was accompanied by a 5-year-old niece, who was Miss Jenny Cannon of Ponca City. She was impatient and said, "Uncle Matt, we just going to have to hurry or we won't get there on time." To which Uncle Matt replied, "Don't worry, Jenny. This is one time when the thing won't come off till I get there." Mr. and Mrs. Goodson now live at 321 East Blackwell, which was built and occupied by the late Indy Kistler. Although interested in other lines of business, he was one of the very few who still owns and operates the land he acquired in that early day, for at the end of 41 years, Mr. and Mrs. Charlie Kiger were his only neighbors.
Mrs. Goodson, scratch that. Mrs. Cannon, I know you have a lot of background of the history of Ponca City. Would you give us some information as you can see the history and the foundation of it for Ponca City?
I have lived in Ponca City 44 years. I came here as a bride, and my husband was a chemist for the old Marlin Oil Company, which later was bought by the Continental Oil Company. And of course, we have a wonderful little city here, and it's grown to around 30,000 now. But one of the finest things that ever happened to our town was Mr. Marlin was governor of our state. And because he loved this town and this community, he gave to Ponca City the pioneer woman. This statue, they tell me, is the second in the United States of visitors of all over the United States. We are indeed very, very proud of it. It was designed by Bryant Baker and presented to the state of Oklahoma by Ernest W. Marlin. I would like to give you the tribute that Mr. Marlin gave in his dedicatory speech of by Mr. Marlin when this pioneer statue was given to the city. When these women started west, all their earthly possessions could be packed on a horse or in a wagon. Many a honeymoon was spent with no shelter save the boughs of trees neath the canopy of heaven. Cold and hunger were frequent visitors, danger their constant companion. What sturdy broods they bore! Loyalty, courage, fidelity, ambition was in their mother's milk. Love of home, husband, children made the wilderness to smile. Fertile fields and blossoming orchards sprung from hot, eye-aching plains, tended by weary bodies and trod by bleeding feet. The conquest of the West was not made with the accomplishment of flaunting banners and martial music. Theirs was a lonely victory. We who have had a part in designing a monument to the pioneer women of America should be proud that we have had this opportunity to pay our tribute to the most heroic figure of all history, the unknown soldier of the great battle for civilization and the home. I might say that my mother, Miss Goodson, was the pioneer mother or woman of K County for many years.
Mrs. Cannon, would you tell us a little more about this very fine book published by the Ponca City DAR?
I will tell you this book was prefaced, and these are the words and the objects of it. The purpose of this volume is to preserve for posterity the stories of the pioneers told in their own language. The history of the struggles and achievements of these men and women is a stirring record that brings a throb of pride to the heart of every Oklahoman. It is a story all should know. When these experiences of the pioneers are told, it is hoped that it will inspire love and gratitude and patriotism. If this little book accomplishes no more, its mission shall have been fulfilled. It is dedicated to those pioneers who made the last run when the Cherokee Strip of the old Indian Territory was thrown open to white settlement, to the pioneers who followed in their tracks, to the brave and hardy spirits whose courage tamed the prairie wilderness and whose labor laid the sturdy foundations for our beautiful Oklahoma. This volume is dedicated in loving memory.
We have just completed a very delightful interview with Mrs. Lawrence Cannon of Ponca City, Oklahoma, on this day, January the 16th, 1972. Your interviewer has been James Katigan. Mrs. Cannon, I understand your mother won a very fine award from the Oklahoma Farmer Stockman. Would you tell us something about this award?
When Mama received this award, of course she was delighted, and everyone said, Miss Goodson, how did you do this? And tell us a little bit about your life. What was your philosophy of life? And she said, I had but one book to go by. That was the Bible. It has the answer to every question that we need in the Bible. And my favorite chapter or favorite verse is chapter 3, Proverbs, which says, Trust in the Lord with all your soul, and lead not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path.
From Ponca City, Oklahoma, for the Oklahoma Living Legends.